Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Grant Cameron, and this is a special triangle panel that was actually the idea of my assistant, Nicole Sakach, who is here today, and will be sort of moderating this discussion. WestJet used to say, as you got on the plane, to make sure you had your seatbelts fastened because we're about to go very, very fast. I think it'll be the same thing. Triangles become a big story. We're going to start with Bob McGuire, who's here today. But let me go through who the panel is. We have two panels. One is today, one is tomorrow. I'm joined, as I said before, by my assistant, Nicole Sakach, who's going to host this. And I'm also joined by my other assistant, who's sort of the producer, who is in the background and is producing this and running it, Debz, and she's busy monitoring the beaches of Florida. So we want to keep this down to hour and a half or 2 hours so she can go and do her monitoring of the beaches. I'm also joined by Bob McGuire, who's Science Bob, has a background in science, intelligence, university background. And he's here with us today, and Colin Saunders is here, a UK witness who has an incredible story and a model that he's built. I'm also joined today by Dale Brown, who's the MUFON State Director for North Dakota. Now, North Dakota is the state that attaches to Manitoba, where I live. So I've been down with Dale Brown and with Kelly Gessner, who was going to be here today, his assistant at MUFON, but she's had some health problems her whole life and she's not doing well today. So we'll talk to Dale, and eventually Dale and I and Kelly will do a interview. We were actually involved, if you've heard the story about the nuclear missiles and UFOs, I was down there investigating, and we actually went and we were documenting a story about Kelly's involvement with a nuclear missile encounter with a UFO. I'm also joined by Joe Buchman, who has run for political office, was one of the moderators for the citizens hearing for UFO disclosure 2013, and he will talk about his triangle encounter. Also joined by Stephen Greenstreet from the New York Post, has done a lot of stuff on UFOs, and I'm very proud that he's actually was one of the few reporter people who actually brought up the Wilson document and actually sort of looked into it. And I'm also joined by Debz, who's an experiencer who I have interviewed on my White House UFO Grant Cameron YouTube panel or channel. So welcome everybody, and we're going to play 3 short clips from 3 other witnesses today. Some of the witnesses I actually took off the panel because they're very big witnesses. One is Lynn Katai, who did the Phoenix Lights story. We actually have a full interview with her, and she brought up some new stuff that I'd never heard before. She's on her 4th edition of her book. We also did Linda Zimmerman, who we're going to play a little couple-minute clip of her. She did the Hudson Valley UFO sightings, has written 3 books on the subject, and talks about the triangle sightings there. And I think we also today may be doing Chris Peters, who's a producer in Los Angeles, and we will do his little clip of his encounters with triangles. So I'll turn it over to Nicole, and I guess we'll start with Bob McGuire.
I just wanted to say a quick welcome to everybody. And yes, we, I think, are in the middle of Triangle Palooza, as I've been calling it this week. And it's really been amazing. And I'd like to thank all of you for being a part of this today. So Bob, you were kind of at the beginning starting this triangle madness with us. So we'll turn it over to you, and you can tell us about your triangle experience of what you've seen and what you've heard.
Mine is not as great as all of yours, but I did have this interesting experience. So I ended a 27-year-long career in the intelligence community in 2010. And then I joined Virginia Tech as the chief scientist, the director of research, and then chief scientist for the Hume Center for National Security and Technology, where we try to get students to be doing science, technology, engineering, and math, and consider a job working for DOD or USIC. So that went on until May of 2011, and I retired. That means I retired from that job, and I read out of all my security clearances. I no longer hold an active security clearance. And I retired to the state of Alabama, where I bought property and live in a house, and I started 2 companies. One is called Hawkeye 360, which is overhead surveillance of the Earth using radio technology to do geolocation of radio transmitters. The other company is a 5G cellular telephone equipment producer called Federated Wireless, which is concentrating right now on using new bands for cellular telephone and wireless communications done in a different way than's ever been done before. So anyway, I'm able to retire, and I'm happy to retire and happy to get out of the rat race. Okay, so about 3 years ago, when all the hoopla began to leak out, then actually come out with the New York Times article, I began saying, there's something to this, I'm interested. So I looked around and I found Richard Dolan, joined as a member, joined his forum, eventually became the administrator and moderator of the Richard Dolan Forum, and he interviewed Chris Bledsoe, and I wrote Chris Bledsoe an email and said, look, I'm a scientist, I'm attached to Virginia Tech, it's easy to check me out, you can find me on LinkedIn or Google or whatever, and you can see who I am. And I'd like to come visit. I'd just like to talk to you about the stuff because I'm a scientist and I'm curious. It took him 2.5 weeks to respond to my email. So I had by then pretty much given up, and he responded, yes. We picked a date. I went to visit. We interacted with him for 3 days while it was cloudy and rainy, but I learned a lot of stuff. Wow, did I learn a lot. In addition to what the stuff about Chris I learned why he let me in the door. He let me in the door because Jim Semivan told him to. So it was just kind of an interesting deal. Jim and I have been in the intelligence community. So it's a smaller world than most people think it is. Okay, so Chris and I went outside and observed, and we had experiences. The experiences were interesting. They're nothing like I'd ever seen before or recall seeing before. And then we concluded our visit. I agreed to consider helping him with some stuff, and I went home. I was followed home and had even weirder experiences at home. So let's not go into that. So anyway, during this last year before I retired, I was shown a photograph. And my initial interpretation of this photograph, which was the Wizzo or backseater in an F-18, had taken a picture out of the canopy over the shoulder of the pilot, and you could see an object in the distance. And I looked at the object and zoomed in a little bit in the place where I could see it, and it looked to me like a triangle in which I could see no lights. Now that everybody has this photo and they get to spend lots and lots and lots of time with it that I didn't have at the time, it's triangular-ish, but it's really a different thing than by basically anybody that's ever seen in a UFO book. It's just really weird. I did some calculations based on information I've been given, and I knew it was interesting. It's not any of the things people have said it is. So anyway, it's just one of those things. I got on a panel with Nicole and Grant. I began talking about it, and all hell broke loose on Twitter. Given my background, it was feared by many that I was talking about a different incident that I will never be able to talk about. Right. And just let's say that I spent time on a submarine. People have seen my picture riding on the sail of a submarine, and that was the USS Hampton. And nothing about what I did there, saw there, or heard there will I ever be able to talk about. Why is this picture out? Because the Wizzo took it with his cell camera. It was not taken by any of the surveillance equipment on the airplane. And from the beginning, I felt like and interpreted the picture as unclassified because it shows nothing of the dashboard. Doesn't show the heads-up display. Doesn't show any of the equipment on board. It was not taken with any classified or secure equipment on board. It's just a cell phone camera, and it was really interesting. So I didn't mind talking about it because I just figured it was unclassified. And after I was shown it, I asked others about it. And I was told that it was all over the United States government. It was everywhere. Position papers were being written. An assessment of what it was being written. Deciding whether or not it was from an adversary or could it be extraterrestrial, whatever. All of that was under consideration. And I was told that. And like everybody else with a security clearance, I basically kept my mouth shut till I saw this stuff is coming out. And that picture is unclassified. So I talked about it with Grant and Nicole, and it blew up. So that's it for me.
Thanks for talking about it.
Yep, happy to.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was dealing with the inventor, so I apologize. And yeah, Bob, thank you for that rundown. And it still is an impressive picture. And like you said, you know, it has some details on it that we really haven't seen before, where we would say immediately, oh, that's the classic iconic triangle that we have seen before. So I think we will still follow up on that. And it's going to continue to be passed around, of course, now that it's out in the community. And it's just so very interesting. And I think this could lead us into...
May I make one more comment? Look, the United States government and the U.S. military, they don't put out pictures or go to all that trouble for a balloon.
Right.
I'm sorry, they don't. And the very notion is absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Bob. And why don't we move down my line here and let's hear from Joe Buchman. When we sent out this triangle craft APB, you dropped in that you have seen one, and what took me by surprise is that it was either over Area 51 or in the area. So take it away, Joe.
Thanks. It's not much of a sighting, but it's worth sharing about. Maybe it'll trigger some memories for Bob or open up other things he can talk about, because I sure am interested in what people can't talk about, right? As the whole planet should be. I mean, if we're not alone in the universe, this is a birthright issue. And when I ran for Congress, I phrased it in those terms. And what I called for the first time I ran in 2008 and again in 2017, we've got to have Congress pass protection of whistleblowers on this issue. We've got to have, after that legislation passes, open hearings. And as far as I'm concerned, well, let me say it before I share that, I respect people honoring contracts. You sign paper, you agree to certain terms, you honor that. I had no problem with that for that individual. But I think that these non-disclosure agreements are anti-constitutional and unethical, and perhaps even to be extreme evil. And I've encountered people who've carried heavy burdens having signed such paperwork. One, a good friend of mine who became chief director of medical operations in Houston, wasn't technically chief medical officer, that's a political position in DC, but he did all the physicals and all the astronauts and had hoped to fly. And another friend who was a chief briefing officer for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he passed away last year. And the burden that I could sense in them for having signed these non-disclosure agreements is extreme. And the things they would really like to talk about, as one of them told me, there's things I would like to talk about even with my own wife that I think are very important. Can't talk about it. If I did, they would find out. I'm not sure who they is. And I go to a place worse than Leavenworth and lose the pension and the healthcare benefits and retirement, and so would she. And so I'm not going to do it, and don't ask me again. I got that. So it would take at least an act of Congress. I hope Congress would have the power to do that and free people up to talk about what I think is truly a birthright issue, evidence that we're not alone in the universe. Then to back up. Bob shared a little bit about his background. I was interested in radio from 6th grade. I built a crystal set. And then I was on the air by junior high school. And my high school had a radio station, and then I was getting paid commercial gigs before I graduated high school, working as an overnight board operator on an AM station, and eventually got an FCC first class license, which is the commercial version of the amateur radio Bob and I were talking about before the recording started here on Zoom. So I've had a lifelong interest in that, and bought an RV in 1998. And within a month, I was down at Area 51, not inside the border of the base, but outside, just looking at the nighttime sky. And I've been down there. I've got journals. I should add it all up, but I bet over 100 nights in the last 23 years, easily over 100 nights, just watching the sky outside of that base. And I met a very interesting character there in Rachel, a guy named Chuck Clark, who is the author of the annually updated guide to Area 51 and S4. Shows you where the border is, gives you a lot of advice about how to be safe out in the desert. And Chuck was also an electronics geek, like I guess we all are. And he was going to run around and maintain the battery-operated TV repeaters. This is before cable, before satellite, in the late 90s, though. And they would have big antennas up on the hillside, pick up the signals out of Vegas, and then retransmit them on a UHF frequency for the locals. And he knew I had worked in commercial TV, so we ran around, and then I went back to his trailer before the FBI raided it. That was only a few months later. And he showed me something that James Fox is now talking about, that James had also seen. And that was a VHS tape recorded by, James didn't remember this, but I do. Chuck told me it was recorded by a couple of professional TV or Hollywood type guys, production people out of LA. I think they worked for a broadcast television station, but it could have been a production house. And they came with a broadcast quality equipment and recorded a classic out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind ship coming right over their car at where the black mailbox used to be. And Chuck had a VHS dub of that. I'm like, well, we got to get these guys to release this information. He's like, well, they can't. And he told me the reason, pretty good reason, has nothing to do with UFO secrecy or any of that. Very personal issue, which I don't want to repeat right now, but they had a good reason for not coming public. So James is now trying to find these guys and other witnesses who remember seeing this tape that Chuck showed. So I asked Chuck, I said, where's the best place to go spend the night and look at Area 51? He said, well, people go too close to the base, and the closer you get to the base, there's a ridge line and it blocks your view of the sky, so you actually see more of the airspace further away. It's a little counterintuitive. So there's a great little spot right off Highway 375. It drops down, curves around. There's no light pollution. You don't see the headlights of cars, but you can see more of the airspace. It's called the Hidden Campsite in his guide to Area 51. That's where I've camped those 100 nights. Only once have I ever seen another human being camping there. And it's on BLM land, so it's just free. So I was down there watching the base, and I got video of a point of light tooling along just above the ridgeline. So if I'd been closer, the ridgeline would have blocked it. Nothing much to that. I showed him the video the next morning, and he said, well, you recorded something flying over S4, the most restricted airspace on Earth. But before that, before I went back to town, the next morning I was up early, and I'm looking at the sky over the base, and I see this cloud moving the opposite direction of all the other clouds. And I'm like, that's really odd, just a little white puffball. So I had a spotting scope mounted to a mount that you put on your window of your car. So that it clamps to the window, roll the window halfway down, clamps to the window, you can look out, and it's a nice stable platform for the spotting scope. Look through the spotting scope, and here's this little cloud just booking along. look with my own eyes, can't really see anything, look through the spotting scope, and it banked. And as it banked, there were 3 perfectly spaced, very bright white lights in the shape of a triangle. And I went, wow, that's flying over Area 51. It's a triangle craft. It's not black, it looks like a cloud. And then it went below the ridgeline before there was any hope of grabbing a camera or getting a photo. So that's my one triangular sighting. The other thing I want to share is I've also spent time with Chris Bledsoe, as Bob showed earlier. Chris invited me to his home. I was in DC on my way to the 2018 Libertarian convention that's held in the off years to elect LNC members and platforming bylaws and all that, not a presidential nominating convention. So I was driving near Chris's home and spent a night there with him, also just watching the sky and going to all the places where he had various encounters. I'd actually met Chris earlier that year at the Society for Scientific Exploration convention in Vegas, where Hal Puthoff gave that incredible talk about metamaterials and how much of metamaterials is classified. And I got the audio of that, transcribed it, and Steve Bassett put it out on his website, but I was the guy who was there. And a little bit surreptitiously got the audio tech guy to give me the recording and then quickly transcribed it the next day. And Chris was there, and I got introduced to Chris by John Alexander, of all people. But that's enough of the highlights of the story. That's my one triangular sighting.
Wow.
All those sentences could go for another hour, each one, if you want to hear more about it, but I'll stop talking now.
Well, Joe, we're planning a full-length interview with you sometime soon. I've been bugging you for a few months, but you know, you've been out running around in the desert having fun, so
yeah, and I didn't even mention the Utah monolith. We'll save that one for another time too.
Oh wow! And yep, we'll get these all on tape for posterity. But now I would like to turn it over to Stephen Greenstreet of the New York Post, and we all love him because he supports our community so well. And you know, mainstream media, we always talk about mainstream media's being involved in our community more and more. And I think Stephen Greenstreet is one of those people who is paving the way. He has definitely opened the door and laying the bricks so more people can come through and follow. So thank you, Stephen. And please share with us your triangle story.
Sure. Thanks for having me, obviously. It's a pretty cool crowd. Okay, so just really quick before I get into the triangle story, I'm a investigative journalist, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and 99% of all of what I just said has nothing to do with UFOs. It's not until recently I was approached at the Post and they said, hey, what do you think about doing a video series on UFOs? Do you think you could come up with something? I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I can. And so that's what the basement office is. But I haven't, like a lot of folks here may have, I haven't spent like years or my life diving into UFOs. I still consider myself a semi-skeptic. I at least approach the subject from a skeptical, try to be objective viewpoint. So I don't consider myself kind of on the inner circle. I'm more like outside looking in and observing everything. But let me jump back to 2003. So in 2003, I was living in and working in Provo, Utah. And on this particular night in November of 2003, I was outside of a sound stage. And if you are you guys familiar with sound stages? It's when you're making a movie, it's like that big airport hangar looking thing, and they build sets and stuff inside and they film. I was a lowly production assistant, essentially a coffee getter on this set. And my job at that particular time was to stand outside this door, an entrance into the soundstage, and outside the door was a red light. And when it's on, that means do not come in, we're filming. And so I was right outside the door, kind of like a guard or whatever. It's nighttime, it's about 8 p.m. I'm standing out there, I wasn't looking up in the sky, I was kind of like looking straight ahead. The mountains there were in this direction, so I was looking east. And something caught my eye, and I looked up, and I saw a triangle of blue lights. There was no body. It was just two lines like this. There was nothing in between, just like this, solid black with 6 to 9 bright blue lights on the bottom, moving from south to north. And originally, I had been to an air show before. I'd seen a B-2 bomber. So originally, in my brain, I'm going, this is a B-2 bomber. Hill Air Force Base is down south. You know, this is a B-2 bomber. And then when it hit the zenith, when it hit directly above me, I kept waiting for the sound of a jet, which is you would hear from something that massive. The size estimate is bigger than a golf ball. If I held at arm's length, the object was bigger than a golf ball, and it made no noise, zero noise. And at the point where I expected, because it also wasn't that high, I estimate maybe 2,000 feet. At the point I expected that audio to hit my ears, my heart started going like this, bum, 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 bum. And I could feel my adrenaline. I was scared. I was like mesmerized and weirded out by how can something so large be right there and not make noise? It must be a balloon. But it wasn't a balloon, because the wind was flying at that point east to west, and it was flying through the wind in a straight line. It wasn't moving, or it was straight line. And so it couldn't have been something light, or it was something solid and large. It made no noise. And I remember the feeling that I described in the aftermath was one of, it felt like a personal moment. Like it felt, in retrospect, it felt like a private moment. And Nick Pope on the show, I did an episode about this. Nick Pope brought up, he said, it's almost as if you were being shown something. You were being shown something. And I was like, that's weird, you know? But, you know, that notwithstanding, I do remember my emotions, and my emotions was I was mesmerized, I was confused, I was scared, and I'll never forget it. And it also wasn't a, I mean, when it got directly above me, I could see it more clearly. And just that shape, just two sticks stuck together, black with blue lights on the bottoms. I was like, never seen anything like that before. Never since seen something like that. Skinwalker Ranch from where I was is about, I want to say 65 miles to the east. I mean, as the bird flies, just boom, 65 miles there. Area 51, as you know, west, hop, skip, and a jump west of me. Part of my brain still to this day thinks it was something human-made, experimental aircraft. There are Air Force bases in the area. There are testing grounds in the area. But it's that emotion that keeps me from fully believing that it was something human.
Yeah, no, and that kind of emotion is described all the time, no matter what kind of craft sighting. And I know what you mean about it not being this typical standard 3-sided triangle. And I think sometimes we refer to these as boomerangs or even chevrons. So they're all kind of in the same category for me. But what time of day was this?
This was about, this was November, and it was around 8 or 8:30 at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So,
and it was dark out. There were low flying clouds. You know, those low ceiling clouds that move really fast in the wind. Mm-hmm. I could see the stars. It wasn't like full cloud coverage, individual clouds moving. And I could see the stars through the clouds. Those clouds were maybe 2,000-3,000 feet up, and this object was below the clouds. Yeah. So I didn't view it through the clouds. I saw it under the clouds.
Wow.
So I saw it pretty clear when it got over me. And I remember the red light that I was guarding, it went off, and that snapped me out of it. And I went back inside where the whole film crew is. You know, they're resetting and they're doing audio and makeup. And I'm like, guys, I think I just saw a UFO. And everyone, the whole film set was like, what? I was like, no, seriously, I think I just saw a UFO. And everyone just kind of dismissed it because, you know, they hadn't seen it. They were in their own world or whatever. And I kind of semi-compartmentalized the sighting itself really until, and I told some close friends about it, but really until Nick and I had that sit down and we discussed it, and Nick was able to like bring out of me more kind of like emotional analysis of it.
Wow.
Were you aware of the Phoenix Light story or UFOs at that time? Because you've
No.
interviewed Lynn Katai. So
I have.
when you
So-
interviewed Lynn, did it ring a bell with you when she started talking about what they were seeing there?
Okay, so in 2003, at the point of my sighting, no, I wasn't familiar with the Phoenix Lights. I wasn't familiar with Lynn. I wasn't familiar with much of I mean, beyond watching the X-Files when I was a kid, I mean, I wasn't really deep into UFOs. I wasn't really familiar. Yes, the Phoenix Lights, some of the lights out of the light structures, at least in Illinois. I actually saw some footage of out of Brazil. I think it was last year, night footage of a triangle where it wasn't a delta shape. It looked like this. That I was like, oh wow, like okay, so I wasn't the only one to see something like this. I'm not. I didn't have some unique experience. Like this seems to be a common craft that has been seen.
Did that make you feel better once you found similarities? I found comfort in it after I started finding similars to my first one.
Sure. I mean, it validates your sighting a little bit. While at the same time, if you are someone like me who wants to be open to the fact that it could be a human-made craft, then it also could lead credence to that it, more people are seeing this craft in the sky. But again, at the end of the day, physics working the way physics and math works, it should have made noise. There is absolutely no way something that large, that sturdy, could fly against the wind and not fall out of the sky without making enough noise, at least with the technology we are familiar with to this date.
Absolutely. Wow. That's a good summary of a sight. And it's an impressive first sighting, I would say, as well. And they do stick with you.
Yeah.
And I want to go ahead and jump to Colin Saunders. He's coming with us, or he's coming to join us from the UK this afternoon. And since we've talked about it already, I think we need to see his model. And so we can give a good reference to this. And Colin, are you still with us?
I'm still here, yes.
Turn it over to you.
Right, okay. So to give you a quick bit of background, I've spent my whole life, my whole career as a draftsman, electrical draftsman. And I have actually worked in the aircraft industry. I've worked on the Airbus in Germany, and I worked for Saab Aerospace in Sweden for a couple of years. I've also worked in the oil industry for Chevron Petroleum, been on quite a few helicopters. So my aviation experience is quite vast, if you like. So 31st of March 1999 at 9:50 p.m. there was 4 of us in the car. My wife was driving, I got my daughter and my mother-in-law. We'd been out for a meal out in the countryside, and on the way back we turned onto what's called the Fosse Way. It's an old Roman road here in the UK, and hovering by the side of the road was some lights, some red lights with a bit of white mingled in. We drove towards these lights and we were all so excited by it. And we drove underneath. We knew it wasn't an airplane, we knew it wasn't a helicopter, and there were no noise, and there was no other cars involved. And as we drove more or less underneath the lights, which I would now estimate at being just 100 feet away from us, the craft materialized. There was no solid craft there when we first arrived. All we could see was lights. So if you can see the model here, we came up to the back of the craft. We've got these lights there pointing towards the car. And like I say, at the time we stopped underneath it, there was no craft. And then as we looked at it, the sky started to ripple and the craft decloaked, just like Star Trek, just cloaked in front of our eyes. And once it did that, it maneuvered. The nose rose in the air like this, but it rose like a submarine underwater. The way it floated was so peculiar. And it was so low to the ground that it tilted from this rear end. up in the sky like this. If it had tilted from the middle, it would have struck the ground. It was that close to us. I could have hit it with a cricket ball. It was just incredible. Now, during the course of this, something peculiar happened, but only happened to myself. Once the craft tilted up like this, all of a sudden, it was like somebody had put some binoculars in front of my eyes. These details on the craft was right in front of me, like 6 foot away. Then the nose, the big round nose, I could see that. I was so close to it, I could almost touch it. And then there was a side view where I could see this white central core, and the top and bottom rolled over like a hovercraft skin or like the edge of a pie. So there were 3 distinct views, but nothing in between. So I saw the top of the nose and I saw the side view, but I didn't see it roll. And like I say, it was like it was 6 foot away from me, like somebody had put a telescope in front of my eyes. We drove forward, a big hedge blocked our view, and I thought, if it's going to go, it's going to go now. My wife reversed into a gateway. We jumped out of the car, and sure enough, it had gone. But in the distance, there was this huge triangle of craft disappearing, the one that would be the size of a football pitch. It was absolutely enormous, and I assumed that this one had gone back to the mothership. So prior to this, I had no great interest in UFOs. I'd never researched anything. But obviously, after such a close encounter, you know straight away it was not from this world. And it was like meeting God. It was just so fantastic to see. Absolutely incredible. These lines were actually raised off the surface, interlocking, like beams. The bottom was modelled on a sighting from Belgium back in, I think it was 1978, where somebody drew the underneath of a craft. Now you can see the same, this is the Belgium sighting. So you can see all these interlocking lines. I assumed that that would be the underneath of the top of the craft that we saw. We only ever saw the rear and the top of this craft. We never saw the underneath. So between the Belgium sighting and this sighting, I made this craft. Now, without the close views, I wouldn't have been able to construct such a detailed and perfect craft. Now, many years ago, I had the privilege of meeting Bud Hopkins. I met him here in the UK at the Leeds UFO conference. I met a lot of good people over the years there, Stanton Freeman being one of them, Dr. Roger Lear, I met him. But Bud Hopkins said to me that these images, the 3 close-up images, were placed in my mind by the aliens. And I was convinced, and I was telling Bob I thought it was an out-of-body experience. So I could not understand why they would want to place images in my mind when I was so close to the craft. So for 20 years, I was thinking it was an out-of-body experience. Then out of the blue, I received this email from America, from a guy who'd seen one of my presentations. And he said, just like you, I had 3 images placed in my mind from a close encounter with a triangle. Now, he's never got in touch with MUFON or anybody like that. He's kept it quiet. I think I'm the only person he spoke to about this. And since then, I've also met another guy in New Zealand who's had the same close viewing of a triangle. So that's 3 of us now have had these close viewings. And it dawned on me when I got that email from America that it was telepathy. They do always talk, you listen to abductions and people who have been taken, they always talk about telepathy. Now, in my naivety, I always thought telepathy would be a voice in your head and you would return that like a conversation without opening your lips. But you do hear people talking about images being placed in the minds. And an image, a picture will paint 1,000 words. So I then figured that Bud Hopkins all those years ago was probably telling me the truth. And I find that it took a while to sort of come to terms with that. So basically, I'm telling you, I believe I've had telepathy with an alien that was on board the craft. Although it's true to say, as I was saying earlier on, if you see the dark grey liquid in between these beams, that looked like a lake of liquid mercury. It was moving up and down the surface of the craft, whereas the silver beams on top were interlocking and they were solid. They were not moving. So I have my own theory about that as well. I believe my theory would be the liquid could be something like liquid nitrogen. So we've got minus 273 degree Kelvin. These beams on the surface go down into the liquid and become super cooled, top and bottom. So we've then got superconductivity and we've got quantum levitation. And I think that is why you don't hear any energy, you don't hear any noise. And there's also, when we jumped out of the car, there was no smell of any aviation fuel. Nothing had been burned. But we knew that already, because we knew from the actual encounter that this craft was not from this world. It was from somewhere else. Now, prior to the UFO sighting, I had no paranormal experiences at all. Since then, I've had quite a few, to be honest. I won't go into details of them on here. But after I had some of these strange experiences, it is obviously connected to the close encounter with the UFO. And it was at that point I decided that this had to be dimensional rather than extraterrestrial. If this was coming from another planet and interacting with people, once it left, you would not expect to have any more experiences. But because I believe this was dimensional, and it's played with my head a little bit with some of the images, it has left some sort of residue behind and left me open to seeing and experiencing other paranormal things on this earth, which I've come to the conclusion are always here, but we just don't get to see them until you somehow get to see them, like I've had my mind probed a little bit by the aliens. I'm glad it was my mind, but that's basically the story of the encounter with the triangle, and I will never forget it. It's been the most amazing thing in my life. I think about it every day for the last 20 years, 21 years. Every day I think about this, and I research it all the time. I talk to people, and the amount of people I've met in the UK who have had triangular experiences with large craft, local people, it's just incredible. It's incredible. It never gets into the mainstream media, but they're here. I know they're here. So that's basically our story. Thank you for listening.
Amazing. And
yes,
you know,
yes.
I think it's so wonderful. I heard you mention that you collaborated and pulled the underside from the Belgium triangles, and we'll be discussing that one tomorrow. And how long did it take you to work on this model? I know it becomes an obsession, and you mentioned that it's kind of taken over your life a little bit, but
yes, initially I made paper models that I drew in CorelDRAW and printed those out. Then I made my first, interestingly enough, I made my first wooden model, and I printed off the drawings from CorelDRAW and glued them onto this model I made. And strangely enough, I had a break in my van that I use for my business, and a cassette player was stolen from the dashboard. But also, I found out later my model was taken. I never did see that model again, and I know it was in the car. And when I took my car to my friend to have it fixed, because they'd broken into it through the door panel, he said it had been done professionally. So I got a sneaky feeling somebody come and took that first wooden model away. So then I made a second wooden model, and I bought some lights and switches and put those into it. And then a good friend of mine was getting into 3D printing. Initially made some small triangles for me, and I sold a few of those on eBay. All the profits going to my friend John, because the payment I wanted was this large model. So once we sold a few of the smaller models, he then made this large model for me. And it took quite a while to get this right, and to get the surface correct, to make it look like liquid. That was quite an achievement by the guy who did the paint spraying. So I've been working on these sort of things for 22 years now, and you know, I just can't let it go.
it's amazing. Another long interview we did with the Triangle Craft Witness was Melinda Leslie, and she actually shared her story of being taken on board a triangle. And before we went live, you showed us the inside of your model, and as I was looking at that, I was recalling Melinda describing the inside of her craft, and it's just amazing. So if you would, could you show us the inside as well?
Craft, and if we take the lid off it, hopefully you can see the insides there. The battery packs we've put in.
And
we've got a dry joint, unfortunately. I've realised tonight on one of these lights. That's better. The centre light should be on as well.
wow.
I need to solder that.
Who did you collaborate with to get an inside perspective?
Right, it's not really an inside perspective of the triangle that we saw. It's just what we've manufactured to get the lights to come on. But it's a good friend of mine called John Mills. He makes a lot of medical components. He uses 3D printing for that reason. We've been good friends for a long time, and I'm always going on about these triangles. And one day he just said to me, I'd like to make you a 3D printed model. And that's where it started. We made the first small ones. Then he made a saucer, and then also we've made a tubular cigar-shaped UFO as well. These are all selling on eBay, and I don't make a single penny. In fact, on some of them I actually lose money by the time eBay take off the commission and PayPal and all the rest of it. But for me, it's more of a case of getting the word out there. I don't know why I feel so possessed about doing this, but I do.
Right.
I just can't let it go. It's just been such an amazing experience.
So
And really, 100 feet, I mean, I don't know anybody really who's been closer unless they've been on board.
So you have the same as I had with my Triangle 76 and Stephen Greenstreet talking about this personal encounter. It wasn't just a sighting. There was a connection between you and the object, right?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. There's also a part of me wonders whether the craft itself may have some sort of intelligence. I don't know why I say that, but it looked to be organic when it moved in front of us, but you could clearly see it had been manufactured. But
Wow.
yes, it did feel like after all these years, it feels like it's been very personal, especially as there was 4 of us. Now the other 3, my wife, my daughter, and my mother-in-law, have not gone on to have other experiences. It's only been me that's had these other experiences, and I figured now after all these years that would be because of the images that were placed, the telepathy between myself and the occupants of the craft or the craft itself. But yes, it was certainly a very personal experience, and it has changed me a lot.
You hear that often too, with multiple witnesses. I know my first sighting, I was the one that took away the personal message. The other 2 witnesses have just, blown it off over the years and haven't dove into this world like I have. And that's one thing I found, like when I asked Stephen if he found comfort in finding other stories, that was one thing that gave me comfort, is hearing all these multiple witness sightings where one person can have this profound experience while the others, sharing it, it's not quite at that level. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I first saw your models on Facebook, I think about 3 years ago. And I was just floored then. I think I took some screenshots of them, and I was just blown away. I'm like, this is so detailed. And thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you. Thank you
for that. And I think we're going to move this along to Debz, and we'll let her join in this discussion.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Nicole, and thank you, Colin. I'm Debz. I go by Debz Shakti. That's kind of my spiritual name, yogic name. I won't go into a long detail about who I am or what I've done in the past, other than to say I have been a lifelong experiencer, and not just extraterrestrial, but interdimensional. I came in as an interdimensional being myself, where I've had all of these experiences with other beings, other layers of life, other frequencies. I can see and utilize energy in different ways. And I have all the clairs. So I'm clairsentient, clairaudient, all of that. Exercise telepathy, not just telepathy, telepathy. So I can really merge and connect with people and other beings. I think they're all people. And to be honest with you, after almost 65 years of being this way, I have to say, I truly think whatever we're connecting with, whatever we're making contact with, is just us on different quantum levels, different frequencies. It's just us. We're interacting with ourselves, so it's, when you say you feel like you've had a personal experience, yes, you have. You are making contact with the deeper part of yourself, or if you want to give it a little more of a zoomed out perspective, with your relatives. I was deeply moved by all of these stories that we've been hearing today, but especially I want to just speak to Stephen and to Colin for a second about what you experienced. I've had literally tens of thousands of sightings every day. I have contact, and most of them, there are sightings of craft or beings, and some of them are just telepathic, but many of those craft have been either chevron or triangular in shape. Some have been the giant mothership, Close Encounters of the Third Kind of ships, little tiny orbs, all of that. But I do want to say, Stephen, the shape that you're talking about, 4 years ago, I was just driving on the highway, commuting from my corporate job, which I won't go into what I do in the corporate world. I've always been a professional corporate person as well as all this woo-woo stuff. But I was just driving in rush hour traffic. It was dusk, and suddenly something caught my eye on the left side, and I just turned for a second to look, and on almost at the western horizon, there was a huge chevron shape. It didn't have the blue lights, Stephen, like yours did. It was gold. They were gold, brilliant. And, you know, to see the size of this, I would say it was probably the size of you know, maybe a cereal box held at arm's length, but it was on the horizon. So that tells me it was probably hundreds of miles large. That was this gigantic thing. And it was keeping pace with my car. And if I slowed down, it would slow down. If I would speed up, it would speed up. And I was so enthralled, despite having all these sightings on my life. I'm like, this thing is communicating with me. I looked around, no one else is noticing it. Not all the thousands of cars on the highway. And it felt like it was just communicating with me. It was consciousness, as well as obviously some sort of physical or mechanical looking kind of thing. But it was almost like it was just keeping pace with me to say, hey, we're stopping in to say hello, and we know you're bored, and we're just looking at your mind as you're doing this, you know, what you consider an everyday routine thing. And then it immediately became very small and disappeared, which tells me it just shot off, you know. So that was one. And I just wanted to validate your sighting, Stephen, because that's what that chevron looked like, only it had blue lights. Colin, your model made me weep when you showed it earlier before we went on live, because that is what most of the triangular craft that I have experienced in my life look like, including the designs on them, including what you say is that mutable liquid mercury kind of film that goes between those silver designs. But even the shape, the light in the center, the 3-point lights and the lights at the back, all of those I can corroborate with you. So the one main story that I'd love to give, because I could talk for 6 months and not tell you all of them, but the one that I think is most encouraging or even unique is that I've been a lifelong runner too, and I was running along the lake where I live, and it was early morning about 4 years ago. And, you know, it was a fall day, and usually you'll get some fog, you know, in the early morning hours when the sun's coming up. It's been chilly overnight. There's some fog coming off the lake and so forth. And that's always been kind of fun to run in. So I'm running, and suddenly I get hit. It almost felt like I was hit with a warm, it was cold out. I felt like I got hit with a warm blast of air, but it felt physical right in my chest. And it kind of took my breath away, and I stopped and turned and faced the lake because I was running, you know, alongside it in this thick fog, which had become thicker and thicker and thicker. And suddenly I see a very bright red light just above the surface of the water. Now this lake is a small lake, so it's maybe at the deepest 30 feet deep, maybe. It's just a neighborhood lake. But I see this huge red light, and immediately I knew I was having contact because I perceived consciousness. It feels to me like we merged, like we're linking. And so I stopped, I said, thank you, hello, whatever, you know, in my mind. And from that red light, there came out of the lake with no sound, no water displacement, no splashing, this gigantic, bigger than a football stadium, triangular craft. and it hovered about 6 feet above the water. And it was just at eye level with what I consider the nose of your model, Colin. There was a red light there, and it was just, but it wasn't a light fixture. It was like an organic liquid light source, and it was just beaming right at me, and it was just staying there, and I felt a connection. And then suddenly I could see that it was a triangular shape going out from my perspective, from the nose going back to the two sides, to the other points. And alongside that, just as on your model, there was like a kind of a white or bluish white seam. And that was also that liquid light. And it began to kind of, light was pulsing from one end of that kind of chevron shape, from one end of the nose to the other, to the back, like this. And it felt to me like I was being scanned, but not intrusively. It felt like how a new, forgive me for saying this, but this is what it felt like, how a new lover would just make eye contact and try to just drink me all in. And so I just stayed there, and I said, is there anything I can do for you? What, how are you? Who are you? And I just got a flood of images, and the images were so beautiful. And I have no words for them, but I think one of you, I can't remember which one of you said it now because it struck me, but it is like meeting the mind of God. It's like meeting the divine. And I felt so beautiful. And I want to say I hear music, but I don't. From these beings, I feel music. It's like, what do they call it? Synesthesia. It's like I can taste the music inside my body. Okay, so anyway, so I'm having this experience, but the whole time my scientific part of my brain is saying, okay, now here's something interesting. This thing is way too big to have been hidden under the water in this little lake. So that's number one, that's impossible. Number two, something that big, because it was about 20 feet tall in height and about as big as a football stadium wide. Something that large, even if the lake was deep enough, would have enough mass, if it were physical, to displace the water where the lake was, the water level had risen, but it hadn't. There was no water displacement. And as it rose, and it rose very slowly out of the lake from my first sighting, there was not a splash. There was no displacement of water, no displacement of air. There was no, other than that initial whomp in the chest with the warm feeling, there was no temperature change, no smell difference, nothing, no sound. So that just told me, this is another one. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much. And as I said, thank you that last time, it again, just like the other thing that I described, it just kind of compressed down in size and shot off like a shooting star, was gone. And at the same instant, there was no fog. It was completely, the air was completely cleared of fog, and it was a sunny day. So that's a really incredible sighting I wanted to share. And I will say that I have been aboard hundreds, if not thousands of times. And what I will say is that most of the time that I've been what I would call being aboard a craft, I don't feel like it's so much being aboard something, even though it looks like you are in a room or in a space of some place. I believe that it is that consciousness or group of consciousness and myself meeting in a non-local point of reality. I truly do. And they give us these visuals so that we don't feel so freaked out that we're, out of our comfort zone. But often the space will be translucent and I can see. When I was a child, I was in one, and I had been hiking in the woods, and suddenly I was in one, and the bottom of the ship, if you will, was translucent, and I could look down and see where I had been in the woods. I could see probably because they wanted me to be reassured I was okay, that, I had a point of reference. But most of the time, it's just this space that is filled with a palpable sense of love and acceptance and connection. And, I've seen instrumentation and things like that in some of them, but for the most part, I believe it is a space within ourselves that they take us so that we can have this very deep connection and merge. So I guess that's all I wanted to say for this one. I don't want to take up too much time, but I could talk for the rest of my life and not get it all out. But thank you so much for the opportunity, Nicole.
That was so beautiful, Debz. And, I'll say it. I think women have this special way of being able to put these experiences into words. And I got goosebumps several times while you were talking. And so just thank you so much for sharing. And that empath side of you comes through so very well. So I appreciate that. And
thanks so much.
Before we move on to Dale Brown, I know Stephen has to get out of here and he's got another appointment. So I just wanted to thank him for coming on the panel today and sharing his experience. And I wanted to give him the opportunity to say bye to everybody. So Stephen, we know you're a busy guy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for, having me on here. And I heard some stories today for the first time. So it was awesome to hear everyone share their experiences. And I want a model of that triangle for Christmas. And that is an awesome model. And I just want to say as I said before, semi-skeptic, thanks for allowing me to kind of go a little deep today, because I followed you guys today, and it was a cool experience. So thanks again.
Steve,
Our pleasure.
Steve, can you make a comment on the latest breaking story now that you're in the major media? What's your reaction to this latest story coming out of the government?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, having worked, interviewed, talked with Tim McMillan a lot over the last, a year or two, I feel very confident in his ability to kind of get into a story, and it's legitimate. I like his journalism, and he's a hard worker. So it's great. It's fantastic. And I think the biggest thing that stuck with me about the story is, and it's something boring, is, he mentions in the article how the way the government works, leadership positions are coming and going, and who's in charge of the DOD today, maybe someone new tomorrow, and who's in charge of X program could be moved to a different department in a week. And I brought this up on Twitter, are you really going to entrust something so sensitive and something so potentially important, and as UFOs, as is it aliens? Are you really going to entrust that to someone who might not be here tomorrow? Are you really going to entrust that information to a department or something that is temporary? Or the next president's coming in, so I guess that goes away. So it doesn't ring true to me that you necessarily would put all your eggs in a certain DOD basket, or that you would want to remove it and put it into a more permanent bubble or a more permanent pocket. And then the second thing, my reaction to the story that broke this week, is I simply do not buy at all this ongoing, we don't know, we're trying to get to the bottom of it. If we could just find out. I don't buy it, man. The most powerful military on planet Earth is not going to tolerate unknown objects infiltrating sensitive airspace, infiltrating, naval ships and Air Force pilots and nuclear power plants and airports, and just go, oh, wonder what that was. Let's get to the bottom of it. No, there is, as Nick Pope says, there exists a best current assessment of what these are. It exists. There exists a best current assessment at the very least. And I'm curious as to what that best current assessment is. So those are my takeaways from this week.
We always hear the excuse of the public's not ready or they can't handle certain aspects. You working for who you work with and interacting with the public, do you think the public's ready? Or do you think they can handle it?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. Like, I think we as a populace, as an organism of people, I think we adapt pretty well. I mean, humanity's been through a lot of crazy, horrible, positive changes and stuff. Like, yeah, I think so. Honestly, and then another thing is I have to be able to give the benefit of the doubt to, maybe it's true that they don't know. You know, maybe it's true that like the military and the DoD and all these people, they simply don't know. And the most powerful country on planet Earth admitting they have no control, I think it could be a pride thing. You know, it could be an ego thing where it's like, we don't want to admit that we have no handle on this. That's also a possibility.
Wonderful. Well, we'll let you get scooting now. Thank you again so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm going to bow out as well now. So thanks for letting me come on and talk about my experience.
Oh, Colin, thank you so much. And I know everybody is going to be asking, where can they get these triangles? So
yeah, if you email me, I'll be able to sort one out for you, no problem.
Perfect.
There you go. Printing instructions.
Yes.
Sorry,
Bob, get in on that. And we do have one more guest.
I have a comment on Sydney's thing before we get too far away from it. The Pentagon and the agencies around it, the leadership is political appointees and military people who are going through 3-year rotations. But the vast majority of people who work in those departments are permanent civilian employees, and in them is invested the corporate memory.
Thank you for clarifying that, Bob. And yes, that's why we bring you on. You always drop these little knowledge bombs on us about the intelligence community and give us details on that I think in the general community, we just don't know about. We don't know how these things operate and the structure that's in place and behind it. And we do have one more guest tonight, and Grant gave him a little bit of an introduction. We have Dale Brown with us. And so if he would like to join this discussion and tell us about his triangle sighting. Did we lose him? Dale, you're muted, so you'll have to hit your little microphone button. Here he is.
All right, I should be unmuted. Sorry about that. I'm new to the whole program here in the sense of Zoom meetings and such. I hope you can see me okay. I'm in a remote location. I live in the hills and I get very bad reception. So I chose to come down where I would get a greater reception. And I need to clarify something immediately.
Dale, did you want to share camera as well? Because you can click the little camera icon and it will share your video screen. It's on the bottom left.
Yes, I'm trying to get my phone to work with me here.
Okay. We can hear you loud and clear though. Oh, there's your picture.
All right, hopefully you can see me well enough here.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
As I said, I'm in a remote location because I don't get reception where I live very readily. I need to clarify something though, and that is that Grant has introduced me as the state director of North Dakota MUFON, and that was true in the past, but at the current time, I'm an inactive field investigator due to some health concerns and other private matters, including death threats. I had decided to just step away from it, but part of the reason that I'm no longer an active field investigator and we no longer have official North Dakota MUFON chapter is due to the fact that we were not able to get enough people to come forward to fill the official positions to satisfy the state's requirements. So can you still hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to jump right into one of my sightings that is involving the triangle. I actually have a low battery, so if I disappear, it's because I've been waiting my turn. But anyway, you know, I've been involved with MUFON for many, many years. I had my first sighting in 1976. I had mentioned some other sightings on the thread line that was started by Grant in reference to starting this conversation. Having said that, I've been around a lot of investigations into the UFO phenomenon, and I had heard many of the stories of triangle UFOs before I had seen my own, and I'd just like to jump right into that experience. I was moving personal belongings out of part of my parents' property after they had passed away, and I had my car running in the evening. It was a fall evening, late July or early August, and it was just getting dark enough that I pulled the car up to the garage there, and I was transferring items from one building and outbuilding to my car to take back with me to my home. And I noticed a bright light in the distance in the northeast sky in the region of Cassiopeia. And this light just caught my eye, and I continued to make treks back and forth from the car to the shed, and I kept glancing up there and noticing this object. And it just kept getting brighter and brighter and a little lower. And it just started getting too bright that I knew this was a moving object, first of all, and it was something that was getting closer. I could sense that immediately. It was getting closer. So I continued to kind of keep my eye on it. And it was initially a single light in the distance, looked like a small plane. And as it came closer, it got brighter to the point where I thought I could distinguish several lights. And then the object appeared to have more lights, and I got a little confused as far as, you know, the coloring and everything. The colors on the lights as well started to show up. And I thought maybe this was a larger airplane. And I thought, what is it doing here? Because it's not part of a normal flyway pattern for the local air traffic. But as I was continuing to move these objects into my car, I would glance back up there, and I started getting concerned that this might be a plane was actually going to land in a field adjacent to the farm. Wow. And so I really started paying attention, and I started getting a little worried. And the light pattern made no sense as far as an airplane. It was obviously not an actual airplane. As it got closer, it got more and more lights started to show through. And eventually I was really concerned that something may be landing out here near me. So I went to the car, and I actually grabbed the pistol that I had in the car. I was that concerned. It was getting that close, and it seemed to be making an approach as if it was going to be landing in the field adjacent to the farm. So I had the car lights on. It was dusk. I had the car lights on, and as this object approached, it basically started to materialize with so many lights, I couldn't really discern the shape of it any longer. There were so many lights, it didn't make any sense in my mind. I have a model here that one of my witnesses had made, and as this object approached, this would have been a white light, if you will, coming from the center, and there are other lights on board this thing. I don't know if it even still works. I could try to turn it on, but he positioned lights in the corners on this model. But when this object turned, I could then see the back of it. And what happened was it kind of came in, and it turned, and it made an angular, directional change. And when it did that, I could see the back of the craft, and it had flashing lights across the back. They literally went in a row like you'd run your fingers down a piano. Da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I thought to myself, well, that's exactly what my witnesses have been telling me they've been seeing. And I was terrified. I was literally terrified. This scared me greatly, and I got into the car, and I thought, well, maybe I should try to record it. And I grabbed my phone and I stepped back out of the car with my phone and turned my phone on. And I was going to step out in front of the car to get a better view, as there was a small tree right in front of me that would have obscured some of it as it was moving away from me. So I was just terrified that if I stepped in front of the vehicle, I would break the headlights beam and they would notice me, if you will. That there was no question in my mind that this was not something that was intelligently controlled. But even in spite of the fact that it was turning and going away from me, mentally I had to tell myself, it's going away, it's going away, and calm myself in that fashion. It was actually a very terrifying experience. So I had the camera, and I got back in the car, and I turned the camera towards it, and of course it was already moving off at a distance, but this came down and it turned and it went flat level, silent. It was only maybe 1,000 feet away from me, and it was huge. This was a very, very large craft, and it flew towards the south, basically towards the capital city, as if following somewhat of the river as it heads down towards the capital city of Bismarck. I immediately, well, I waited a little while to calm myself even further and let it get away, let it go, if you will. And then I proceeded to drive out of the farmyard, and I immediately called Rich Hoffman, who had kind of become a mentor to me through MUFON. And I told him about that experience right away. And I just believe that I was able to witness this coming into our airspace from great altitude and make a maneuver, turn and fly flat and level. And that wasn't the closest experience I'd had. I've had several other experiences, but I wanted to tell you about that experience because in my mind, that was absolutely, without question, a machine. And it came from a great distance, and it maneuvered in the airspace silently, and it was huge. And as I said, it struck me right immediately that what I saw when it turned, when I was able to see the back of the craft, that was what my witnesses had been reporting. And I was actually a little dumbfounded that I was now experiencing the same thing that some of my witnesses had described.
Wonderful.
So that being said, I've been, I've been a believer in many of my witnesses to these events, the triangle events, as well as others, particularly, of course, because I experienced orbs, if you will, firsthand. I've had many experiences, and I submitted many cases to MUFON, many videotapes through the system to MUFON, and I still have videotapes that have yet to be analyzed, and some that have gotten lost within the system. And of course, I would love to have them back. But that notwithstanding, I've been a benefactor for MUFON and was a Region 4 Star Team leader. And many of these sightings that I hear seem to be somewhat embellished. And the personal connection that a lot of people feel to these, I think, is just that, a personal feeling. But I think for the most part, we just happen to be at the right place at the right time. I think I lost my phone now. At least my my camera is probably malfunctioning because I'm low on battery, so I'll have to leave it at that. And thank you for having me on today. And I look forward to watching the rest of the podcast when I can.
Beautiful.
But I can see that my phone is dying now. So
if you can
thank you for having me.
Dale, if you can get in, you're on the edge of the Minot missile field where all the nuclear weapons are. Can you maybe make a comment about sightings in the missile silo area?
He died.
Yep, I think he just went.
Yeah, we went. We'll do an interview.
I can try to get in tomorrow again. I'll try it from my home where I'll have a ability to plug in.
Okay.
All
okay.
Right.
Thanks, Dale.
Wow. Well, Grant, before you jump in with the slides that we have and the PowerPoint, I would just like to say You know, last night I listened to James Fox and Jacques Vallée on Joe Rogan, and Vallée brought up several times in his own research that what he looks for is patterns, patterns and patterns. And I will say the pattern that has jumped out at me today after listening to all of you speak is that whether you looked at it as a profound experience or just a sighting, everyone here today kind of has this ability to reach hundreds, if not thousands of people. And just this sheer fact of you guys coming forward and sharing your stories and talking about this, you know, that's a message right there in itself. And I just think it's beautiful. And I think we have 2 or 3 people on these slides that, Grant, you're going to show. So
maybe what we'll do is we will just open it up for people to talk, because this Desta has actually got an interview, not an interview, but an engagement with the woman that I say may be the top psychic in the U.S. Right now. I won't say any more than that. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But she's got to leave right away. So what we will do is you and I will sit down. We will go through the slides on the PowerPoint with the witnesses that we've done full interviews with. We'll make that part 3. So let's just open it up. We got about 15 minutes because Desta has to leave at 3. I don't want to break this appointment that she has. And so we can open it up for people who want to comment. I just want to mention on the Dale comment that Dale and I and Kelly actually were in the area north of Bismarck, where the Minot missile field is. And there had been a lot, Dale had mentioned this, there had been a lot of sort of interaction, UFO stuff in there. And we actually went to a missile silo, whereas Kelly had a sighting. So I just want to mention that. And let's open it up to people who want to make comments or say something final or whatever, and then we'll shut it down at 3 o'clock Central.
Okay. Do you mean comments from other people on the panel?
Well, anybody that wants to say some more or comment on what other people have talked about.
All right. Does anybody want to go first? Does anybody have any questions? I mean, I think we did a nice summary, but I see Debz. She wants to talk.
I'd like to just say a couple additional things, and that is that you know, this lifelong experience and so forth has I was like, maybe Bob said this before we went live, but he said that he had been in craft too, where he had been trained early on as a child, and that he learned how to read and invent things and so forth. I know that that was my experience too, and I'm not going to go into it. However, what my training was more in was in how to use what they're giving to help other people understand and wake up and integrate what's happening, because it's happening to all of us. I do believe all of us is being visited, and we have been always, but most people don't remember it because maybe they're just not quite ready. They're not at that place in their development yet, or they're about to be, and they have all of these different experiences. So I do work with people on that. I have done that my whole life, counsel people, I work with people, but some of the coolest things that I've seen in groups have been while I host a CE5 or heist group, have for years and years. And I serve on several international CE5 teams and heist teams. You can be sitting in a circle or be with a group of people who are super high level experiencers, all of you, and you can have an experience, you can see, you can have a sighting, you can have an interaction with a being, and absolutely no one else in that group, even of these high level people, will experience that or even know that it's happened. And it will sometimes knock you off your horse and make you think, well, am I crazy? Is that, you know, am I making this up? Am I embellishing? And I don't believe we are. What I believe is that each of us is vibrating in our own, you know, special little frequency, and we are experiencing what is resonant in that frequency. And maybe the person next to you or the group you're with are, you know, you're very coherent, because that's what we strive for when we do this work in groups. However, you still have your own personal signature, and they may be interacting just with the person who is vibrating at that frequency. So for those of you who are watching this later or on YouTube Live or whatever, if you've had that kind of experience where you just kind of feel crazy, like nobody else around me is seeing this and I'm, you know, having this experience, am I crazy? You're not. You're just having a very personal experience, because they hone into your frequency or to a specific frequency. Now, when they want to make a, you know, a more grand exposition with several people or a group of people, they hone in and pull in on the general frequency of the group. But I just want to get that message out there, because so many people come to me and say, I don't believe that it's happening, but I don't know what's happening and I want an explanation. And I think that's the explanation. So I hope that helps anyone who's listening. So thanks for letting me have that forum.
I know Grant and I have mentioned several times that this is often an inward journey to something that happens externally. And I think more and more witnesses, you know, come forth and describe that. And like you mentioned earlier, you know, these beings that you encounter, it is a form of your higher self. I've always been comfortable with describing it that way, as opposed to, as Harry Reid says, the little green men, you know,
Right.
because it's never quite exact to what is in pop culture, I guess is one way to say it. So
it's not.
Thank
And yeah, and you know, what I can say, I think I had said that before we went live, is that I do believe that we are making contact with these beings, but they are other quantum iterations of ourself. They are our relatives. We are entangled, all of us. And I've been a lifelong channel. The main group I channel is, they say they don't have a name, but I asked for a name because people wanted a label, and they said, you can call us the Star Teachers or the Teachers. But literally every single time I channel them, they say, first and foremost, we are you, having already, you know, evolved to a little bit higher level, where we have escaped, we reached escape velocity and actually landed to another frequency where we don't have all this negativity and stuff holding us down. So we're far more creative and having a joyful life. We just want to let you know that you make it. And so every message comes with that under carrier of message, and I believe them. So thanks again.
Beautiful.
Maybe we can go through the people that were going to be on tape. So we've got, you and I did full-length interviews with Lynn Katai, Linda Zimmerman from the Hudson Valley, Melinda Leslie. We did on her 3 top sightings for her 1,275 Sedona tours. And then we have Bashar, the famous channeler. We have an audio of him talking about the triangles that got him going. We got our friend Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio. So we'll go through that. And then for tomorrow, for people that want to watch, we have Dave Marler, who did the book on triangles. We have you and Moranto. Sam Moranto going to be talking about the Illinois sightings where you live. We have Bart Bateman, who's going to, he's the head of the Belgian group. He's going to talk about the Belgian sightings. We have Chase Williams, who's a very interesting guy that most people don't know, but you will know him after tomorrow. He's a friend of mine I've known for a couple of years. He stays in the background, but he's going to sort of come out and talk about his experience. And we have a military witness who may use his full name, may not. Terry Lovelace is a military witness that's going to be talking about his triangle sighting. And then we have, who else? We got Preston Dennett. And we have Joe Burks, who was one of the original CE5 people tomorrow. So that's our list. And you and I will do a third one with all the full-length witnesses. So the big ones like Phoenix Lights, Hudson Valley, all those things were stories that were just too big to put on a panel. So you and I have done full interviews on those people.
Yeah. And we already posted Linda Zimmerman's. That's up on my YouTube channel, Nicole Sakach. So everybody can go and kind of preview that one right now. And yeah, we'll revisit more of hers. So interesting. I thought it was funny, Grant, some of the comments with Linda Zimmerman, they're saying she's like a female Grant Cameron. Which was cracking me up. I just liked it. And I thought that a few times myself while I was listening to you two talk back and forth. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
So,
she is an incredible, not just UFOs, but ghosts. And then when she gets into the science, the mistakes that science has made, and she wrote the book on, and she's a member of Mensa, and she's lectured. If you've seen the video, she did a Mensa lecture where there 100 people couldn't get in the room when she started talking about science. She's an incredible. I really didn't know her that well until I did the interview. And she's done like 30 some books and is prolific in terms of what she knows, especially when it gets to the paranormal.
well, Preston Dennett might have her beat in the book department. We'll get his latest count tomorrow. But did anybody else want to jump in? Bob or Joe or Desta? You're in the background, but I know you're sometimes always interested. Yep,
I want to add that there's a ton of work going on right now in trying to do real science with consciousness. We already talked about Hoffman, but there's also McFadden and others who have posited theory about how consciousness works as a field theory called CEMI, and it's an electromagnetic field theory, and it actually makes predictions which are testable by experiments. So I just think this field is about to blow wide open. And given Hoffman's work and McFadden's work, we know there's a lot to learn.
Wow, yeah. We'll dig into that as it comes up too. And thanks for sharing that, Bob. And Joe, you unmuted, so what do you have to say?
Reading Richard Dolan's new book, Alien Agendas, his speculative analysis of what might be going on. And he mentions Pat Price, the remote viewer from SRI, who's related to the whole Robert Monroe Institute and this experience of remote perception, remote influencing, and find that all fascinating. Recommend Richard's book highly. The other thing I wanted to add is, looks like maybe COVID might disappear in the next 6-12 months or something. And I'm here in Alpine, Utah, just south of Salt Lake. Got 4 empty bedrooms right now. I would love y'all to come visit. We'll head out in the desert. We'll do a night watch and we'll talk all night from dusk to dawn, look at the planets in the sky. My wife and I just did that. And it's really interesting. About 2 months ago, I discovered a little place on BLM land I really like. I've spent about a dozen nights there. 5 of them with my wife, and in one night we saw Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Venus, and Mercury all in the same night.
Wow.
Along with a setting one-day-old crescent moon, and then all those planets. I never thought I'd see that in one night. That campsite was about 20 miles away by air from where the Utah monolith was.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure it's a work of art. I've been to Burning Man since 2010. I volunteer. I'm on conference calls for planning the event. Hopefully it'll happen this year or next year. I think it's a work of art. It's a Burning Man type thing. I predict performance artists are going to cover the planet with monoliths now just for fun.
Yep.
And then once they have 1,000, 10,000 monoliths out there, the aliens could put one out and we wouldn't even know because it'll be covered up by all this performance art. The same way the truth of this issue is covered up by so much other stuff, you know. That's the hardest thing I think for us as researchers, is to sift through the elements of what is truly extraordinary from the stuff that is intentionally poured out there by governments to hide it, and just all the 3-ring circus stuff that's around it from people who are clearly in need of some sort of psychological intervention to help them recover from their insanities. But those are my final closing thoughts. This has been great fun. I'm really grateful to you and Grant for putting this together, and for everybody who shared, especially Bob. Late at night, enough alcohol out there in the desert in Utah. Submarines,
I'm going to
Bob.
come and bring my Celestron 14 and my amateur radio and my Sky Hub. So it'll
man, I would. You know what?
Awesome.
I goof around a lot, but when you say that, I'm sincerely offering that invitation. Come on
That's
out.
great. I'll love to do it. All right, guys.
Cool.
Thank you. And thank you, Desta, for making this work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
All right.